Okay, I want to talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in this second episode. I love the original Texas Chainsaw. I really love the film very much. I'm not a huge fan of the second film, the Hooper sequel, but I do love the remake, the first remake, which was directed by Marcus Nispel and shot by Daniel Pearl. The connecting thread with those two movies is Daniel Pearl. And I've discussed this before, I think on one of my blogs, that I think Pearl had a huge impact on the look of the original Texas Chainsaw. In interviews himself, he has, very kindly, like of course shared the credit with Hooper. But I just find it curious that no other film that I've seen directed by Hooper looks at all or feels like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in terms of framing, camera movement. It's a one-off. Even his own sequel, which of course Daniel Pearl didn't shoot, even his own sequel feels nothing like the original Texas Chainsaw. I'm not a huge fan of the sequel, the one that Canon financed. I'm not a fan of it. I think it's okay. I think it's got some good stuff in it. I think Dennis Hopper's very good in it. But I love the original Texas Chainsaw for so many reasons. One is I think it's really one of the most beautiful films ever made, like in terms of the framing is absolutely impeccable. And it's just very, very, it's like an art piece, except it's called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it really has very little gore. And if you just turn it off and just watch it with no sound at all, it looks sort of like an art piece. It's so beautifully framed. Really interesting focus choices too, like there's an aardvark on a road with a van turning, but they never pull focus to the van. Then they have a low angle as the van like pulls in. Also really deliciously subtle camera movements with grass in the foreground, but just the camera just sort of like edging along, sort of observing, also kind of like slowly descending into a sort of hell. I love the way it's cut too. Like, so there's this beautiful focus pulls. The choice of shots is great. The coverage is really extraordinary, considering it's a film that was made under pretty difficult conditions. I mean, it's well documented how difficult that film was to make. I mean, there's several making ofs, there's all kinds of documentaries on the making of the movie, so I don't need to rehash that. Something I thought it'd be interesting to discuss, though, is that I'm a huge fan of Franklin, and I don't understand why you often hear people talking about how annoying Franklin is. But, if there was one person I would like to meet in terms of the character, I'm not talking necessarily about meeting actor Paul Patane. I think he does a great job as Franklin, but the one person I'd be happy to spend time with who's part of that group in their van would be Franklin. And also what's interesting about Franklin, from the very beginning, Franklin tweaks that there's something terrible going on, and he knows that he's got this sense that they're all gonna, maybe not necessarily thinking that they're all gonna die, but Franklin, he's got this sense that they're doomed. And part of it could be the fact that, he's unattached, so he doesn't have a lady with him, so he's not focused on, going to the old house and spending time with his lady and, being able to sneak away, run down to the old lake or the old creek where apparently Franklin used to get wheeled down there or carried down there. So everybody in the movie is partnered up. They're partnered up, but Franklin's not. So Franklin is kind of being brought along, as Sally's brother, and he's being included, but he's able to focus very much on what's going on. At the same time, he also finds some of the people that they meet, like the hitchhiker, fascinating, because he actually talks about, hitchhiker cutting himself, and Franklin's impressed that the hitchhiker, played by Ed Neal, cuts his palm, and then he draws something on the side of the van, and Franklin's impressed with that. He's not only impressed, but it gives him a sense of the danger that they're dealing with these kind of people. But there's just something about Franklin that's just really, I find, incredibly amusing. He also, he doesn't dismiss anything. He's not necessarily a conspiracy theorist about what's going on or what's about to go on, but he listens and he picks up the signs. And I figure that anyone watching this has already seen Texas Chainsaw, so this is a spoiler if you haven't seen it, so turn it down. But, you know, of course, Franklin ends up the one person who just pretty much gets dismembered with a chainsaw, at least, you know, by suggestion. Because once again, we never see a chainsaw going into his torso, but Leatherface is definitely burying the chainsaw in Franklin's torso. Because Franklin's stuck. I mean, that's the problem. Like, Sally wheels him into the woods, and there's a certain point when she can't really wheel him that much further. And Franklin gets stuck, and Franklin gets killed by Leatherface, played by Gunnar Hansen, who is just the most incredible Leatherface and also an extraordinary presence. And there's also a really great new documentary about Gunnar, which I recommend you see. But, you know, I have every version of Texas. I had the original Wizard video, I think it was, the VHS. This is like a pretty recent one. This is a UK version of Texas Chainsaw, and you know, it's kind of got like the 4K version of Texas. It's got incredible amounts of making of. But you know, the first making of I ever saw of that movie was actually, like, David Gregory did a great one, but there was also another guy who did one who was a friend of mine named Brad Shellady. He did one that was Texas, a family portrait. And that was the first time that I was like more aware of the background, because I met Gunnar Hansen at a convention via Brad. And then we went back to Brad's house, and then Gunnar was there. And then Gunnar wanted to see one of my movies, which has never been released, a series of movies I made called Beyond the Pale. And Brad thought that Gunnar should see it. So it was a weird experience, I must admit. Like, meeting Gunnar was just fantastic. And so sitting with him with Brad was just great, you know, like really a wonderful experience. But again, like I don't know a great deal about Paul Patane, but Franklin, to me, needed to be, he's an essential character to Texas because he's the he gives everybody someone to kind of like play off. He also gives the audience an interesting character, especially the more paranoid members of the audience, an interesting character to focus on. And he's probably the most well-drawn of the characters, because you sort of get to see his neurosis, and you get to see a character whose mind is really working when everything starts going wrong, you know, because he's very, very close to the hitchhiker. And actually the hitchhiker cuts Franklin. So, you know, he feels the full brunt and understands that, you know, they're about to enter a world of hurt. The further they drive, and they're in the territory that's where they're not wanted. And then, despite the fact that they're arriving at a house which they've inherited or used to be owned by, you know, a relative, they're still not wanted in that area, because I mean, they do trespass into the other property. It's not like they don't trespass into that property. And you know, the result of the trespass is that, like, opening a door and walking inside a house, is that they all end up killed. So I think from a script writing point of view, they were kind of careful to make sure that they do actually trespass, like they're not just going and killing them out in the middle of nowhere, but they give them, you know, they give them a good reason, if you want to call that a good reason to kill someone. I mean, it's not really a good reason to kill somebody, but Franklin sort of voices the idea that they probably should be careful. And he also then at that point when he goes into the house, he looks up and sees that strange little sculpture and you hear the sound of insects, and it's just a very creepy moment that shows that, you know, Franklin's the smartest one of them all. You know, the others really don't seem that smart. I mean, Sally's pretty smart. I think Sally's smart. Sally's got like some street smarts, and she's very much able to kind of intuit, like, you know, what's going on. And she even tries to ask when she's being tortured. You know, she does ask them what they want and why they're doing it, etc. Of course, Franklin never gets to actually meet any of them and speak to him, except for the hitchhiker. But yeah, I really like Franklin. I think Franklin's a fascinating guy, and I would have loved to have seen like a movie, even now. I'd love to see a movie about Franklin's early life. I think that would be extremely interesting, you know, because I really would like to see what Franklin's like at home. Like, what's Franklin like just, you know, going to the supermarket? You know, and he also makes those weird sounds all the time too, and he's very, very frustrated. I mean, he's a disabled guy, and he's very, very frustrated, and he kind of shows us that you know, with his disability, he does his best. He does his best, but at the same time, you know, he's sometimes forgotten. I mean, he's in the movie, he's forgotten. Like, they kind of leave him in the house, and they just kind of like, they run down to, you know, Kurt and Sally run up to the house, you know, where the massacre takes place. And poor old Franklin is just kind of like left there to fend on his own. And there's really not much that he can do because he got pushed into that area anyway. So, I mean, later on, it's dark and he's backed by the vehicles. And again, he can't really do much. I mean, he's on his own. But I really do like him. And I think that seeing him in a pre-Texas movie would be, you know, like the early adventures of Franklin, you know, the way he deals with other dramas, and, you know, how he gained his paranoia, and he's really fascinating. He's a very fascinating character, and I like him very much. Anyway, so that's my take on Franklin. So what's your take on Franklin? Just let me know whether you like Franklin. And I mean, he's my favorite character of the group who travel to the group who travel in the van. Of course, the other characters are all fascinating in the house, like, you know, Grandpa's not as interesting, but I like, you know, how they do discuss his history, that he worked at the slaughterhouse, he was the best damn killer there ever was. I like that. And the cook's great. You know, and I mean, it's just a brilliant movie. It's a masterpiece. I like the remake. I think the remake is visually amazing. It doesn't have the freshness of the original because, you know, we know the story, and by the time the remake was made, there had already been probably 3 remakes or sequels, because you had the Nispel remake. Then you also have Texas 3, the Jeff Burr film as well, and then there's a McConaughey Texas Chainsaw as well. I mean, I'm not really a fan of that at all, but the first one is just, to me, an absolute masterpiece. Let me know your thoughts about what you think of the film. I mean, I know most people love it, but what about Franklin? Like, what's the interest in a Franklin prequel? I guess I should also mention, if you like this, subscribe. Subscribe apparently helps, you know, generate interest. You know, I'll keep doing this because I like to keep sharing these passions, because I know I'm also sharing it just like I used to on my blog. I like the fact most that I'm sharing stuff with people who are equally passionate, and on the next one, yeah, I think I'll get back into, you know, I'm going to try to vary between recommending films, and so of course recommend, if you haven't seen it, Texas Chainsaw, like, of course recommend it, and the Nispel sequel, but watch them next to each other, and remember that Daniel Pearl, the cinematographer, he shot both the films, and they're both like just visually spectacular. Anyway, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. better recorded. Yeah, okay. How many we got? I mean, I don't know.